Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta Ayruvin. No, that's not right. That's not right. No, that's not right. No. Start over. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Vav, Daf 66 of Masechta Ayruvin. So the main sugya today is really about being Mevatel reshus to a Nachri who comes on Shabbos. I would say, there's like a few different sugyas, but it kind of stems from that. So the last thing that we talked about yesterday was you had these chevra, and they were, it was Reb Chanina bar Yosef, Reb Chia bar Abba, and Reb Asi, that they visited some place, and the non-Jewish owner was not there at the time. And then on Shabbos, the owner came back, and they're trying to figure out what they could do. And they're making a whole cheshbon. They said, could we maybe rent it from him on Shabbos? Is renting like making an Eruv? And just like you have to make an Eruv before Shabbos, so we would have had to rent it before Shabbos. Or do we say that maybe a rental is like being Mevatel reshus? You can be Mevatel reshus even on Shabbos. So they made a whole, shakla v'tarya. In the end, they decided that they were going to just rent it anyways. Then the Gemara is going to get into a whole thing about that apparently for whatever reason, after they rented it, they were then, everyone was Mevatel the reshus to one other person. Honestly, I don't really understand why they would have to do that. It looks like Taisvis really goes to town on that. But that's going to play an interesting role today. But in any event, they decided that they were going to rent from this non-Jewish owner on Shabbos, because they were going to compare it to being Mevatel Yerushalayim, and you can do that on Shabbos. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says that they were correct in renting this property on Shabbos. Now, the Gemara asks, Toiba Nardai. The Nardai were wondering, would Rabbi Yochanan really say that they did the right thing by renting this property on Shabbos? But Rabbi Yochanan said, Socher k'ma'ariv dami, that renting is like making an Eruv. So my lab, what does it mean that renting is like making an Eruv? Just like you make an Eruv from before Shabbos, so also you would make the rental agreement before Shabbos, not on Shabbos. No, that's not what it means. When Rabbi Yochanan says that renting is like making an Eruv, it's not in that sense. It's mama'ar vafilu pachos mishvei pruta, af socher b'pachos mishvei pruta. Just like you can make an Eruv with bread that is less than the value of a pruta, as we learned on Daf, it was machlokas between Rabbah and Shmuel on Daf Memtes Amud Aleph at the bottom. Did I say Rabbah? I meant Rabbah. No, I think I said Rabbah. Rabbah and Shmuel. That Shmuel says that Eruv is about a kinyan, and Rabbah says that Eruv is about dira. Anyways, if you say that Eruv is about dira, it's about joining together and living together, so then it can be even less than a shavat pruta. So therefore also the rental can be less than a shavat pruta. Just like, as we said the other day, that a yid who is an employee of the non-Jew can join in the Eruv representing the property of the non-Jew. So also you can rent from the employee of the non-Jew. And just like when it comes to Eruv, if you have, let's say, two chatzeres and they want to join together, so what you can do is you can have one chatzer make an Eruv, and then somebody from that chatzer will bring the Eruv over to the other chatzer, and now they'll all be one big Eruv. So you can have one representative representing that first chatzer. So Chanami, also when it comes to renting chamisha sheshruim b'chatzer achas echad socher ayidei kulan, that if you have 5 houses in one chatzer, so you can have one of the people handle the renting for all of them. So in that sense, Rabbi Yochanan is comparing socher to ma'arib, right, for these kulas. However, to be machmir and say that you wouldn't be able to be socher on Shabbos, Rabbi Yochanan was not comparing Eruv and Schirus in that sense. Okay. Interesting little tidbit there about how two chatzeros join together. Rashi, it's actually a Rashi later on today's daf. But basically when you have two chatzeros, I didn't know this until today. When you have two chatzeros, okay, chatzer A and chatzer B, and there's a door in between them, and they want to be able to make it one big chatzer, they want to be able to carry between the two. So what they do is one chatzer will make an eruv with all the people in the chatzer. They make an eruv, and then they take their eruv and they bring it over to the other chatzer, and that'll be the eruv for everybody. The second chatzer doesn't have to make any eruv at all. One of the chatzers makes an eruv and they bring it over to the other chatzer, and that is how they join together. Okay. And we're saying here that you can have one person represent the first chatzer and bringing the eruv over to the other one. Okay. Taiba Reb Elazar. Now, Reb Elazar was wondering because, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I can't say that I necessarily understand why this would be necessary, but the assumption seems to be that what was happening with this non-Jew was that Reb Chanina bar Yosef, Reb Chia bar Abba, and Reb Asi, they had made an eruv already amongst themselves on Friday, but the non-Jewish owner showed up on Shabbos, which basically messed up their eruv. So they don't have an eruv anymore. And then what they were going to do is they were going to make a rental with the non-Jew. And then after they did that, everyone else was going to be mevatel their reshus to like one person in the chutzner, and then at least he will be able to carry, and they could, I guess, carry whatever was there when Shabbos started. Rabbi Elazar is questioning if this is really a possibility. If in this case, when the non-Jew comes back on Shabbos, they would be able to be mevatel their reshus. So let's see. So Taiba Rabbi Elazar was wondering about this case. Amr Reb Zera my tehiyah de Rabbi Elazar. Now Reb Zera didn't understand what Rabbi Elazar was so wondering about. Amr Reb Sheshes gava Rabba Reb Zera lo yada my tehiyah de Rabbi Elazar. And Reb Sheshes says somebody as great as Reb Zera doesn't know what Rabbi Elazar is wondering about. Kakasha le de Shmuel Rabbe. He has a question about his Rebbe Shmuel, which is super interesting. That Shmuel was Rabbi Elazar's Rebbe. I mean, Rabbi Elazar was in Eretz Yisrael. Maybe he started out in Bavel. I don't know. But anyways, he was wondering about something that Shmuel said. The Amr Shmuel, that Shmuel said, Kol makom she'osrin u'ma'arvin mevatlin. Okay, so Shmuel is going to give like three kind of cryptic cases that we're going to have to kind of put together. So the first one is that Kol makom she'osrin u'ma'arvin mevatlin. Then any place where the people there would make carrying usher on one another, but they could join together in an eruv, they can also be mevatel. Meaning, let's just say like a standard kind of, I guess we're going to explain what these cases are. So, ma'arvin ve'ein osrin, in a situation where they can make an eruv, but they wouldn't necessarily be osir upon one another, and we're going to explain all these cases. Or ve'ein ma'arvin, or osrin ve'ein ma'arvin, or a situation where they make it usher upon each other and they cannot make an eruv, ein mevatlin. In all of those right? So in those two cases, you cannot do bittul, and we're going to explain what this means. So here we go. We're going to explain each case. Kol makom she'osrin u'ma'arvin mevatlin. So any place where they make usher upon one another, u'ma'arvin, but they can make an eruv with each other to remedy that, mevatlin. They can do bittul. What does that mean? Kigon, for example, beis chatzer zolif nemizo, the example that's been coming up a lot recently, whether we like it or not. You have two chatzeres, one is inner and one is outer, right? And what's interesting about this case is that the inner chatzer needs to walk through the outer chatzer in order to get to reshus harabim, which means that the outer chatzer is really a space that is shared by everybody, that it's used by everybody. But the inner chatzer, nobody's using it other than the people in the inner chatzer. Okay, so fine. So what happens in that case is that, so we know there's a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim about what happens when both chatzers made an eruv individually. but they didn't make a joint Eruv together, the Chachamim say that it's fine. Each Chatzar can carry on their own. However, the Chachamim would nonetheless agree that if the inner Chatzar did not make their own Eruv, well then you would be unable, even the people in the outer Chatzar would be unable to carry in the outer Chatzar, because it's a space that's used by everybody. And the fact that the inner Chatzar didn't make an Eruv, that kind of messes things up for everybody in the outer Chatzar. Now, so that's a case where you have these people, i.e. the people on the inner Chatzar, are able to create a headache. They're able to make it usher for the people in the outer Chatzar to be able to carry in the outer Chatzar, i.e. if the people in the inner Chatzar didn't make an Eruv, so then the people in the outer Chatzar are unable to carry. Fine. But they can theoretically make an Eruv before Shabbos. If before Shabbos they made an Eruv together, well then you can carry in both because they all join together. Right? So Osrin, when the inner Chatzar doesn't make an Eruv, so then Osrin. But from before Shabbos they can be Ma'arev, and then they can carry. Mevatlin. So in that case, when the inner Chatzar did not make an Eruv, okay, and therefore they're going to create a headache for the outer Chatzar, and even in the outer Chatzar, even though the outer Chatzar made their own Eruv, they still won't be able to carry because it's a space that's used by everybody. Mevatlin. The inner Chatzar people, they could say, you know what, we'll be Mevatel our reshus, we're going to be Mevatel our access to the outer Chatzar, and then by being Mevatel their reshus, then the people in the outer Chatzar would be allowed to carry. Fine. Me'arvin ve'ein osrin. What's an example of where you can make an Eruv, but when you don't make an Eruv, it's no problem? Ein mevatlin, and we say that in that case, you cannot be mevatel on Shabbos. Kigon, for example, beis chatzeris ufesach echad benein. When you have two chatzeris with a door in between them, right? So you have basically just two chatzers. You have two self-contained chatzers, each one has their own exit to reshus harabim, kilu, two self-contained chatzers, and they share a wall. And in the wall, there is a doorway. And the question is, can you carry between the two chatzers on Shabbos? Well, it depends. If they don't make an Eruv, no, you can't. But if they make an Eruv, you can. So what happens if they, right, so this is a case of Me'arvin. If they make an Eruv before Shabbos, you can carry through both of, in both of them, and even between them. Ve'ein osrin, but when they don't make an Eruv, no problem. You could still carry in each one individually, right? They don't make it usher upon each other. However, so in that case, ein mevatlin. Let's say for whatever reason the people in one of the chatzars wanted to carry something into the other chatzar on Shabbos. The people of the chatzar that they want to carry it into, right? So it's called chatzar A and B. So if people from chatzar B want to be able to carry it to chatzar A, we can't say that people in chatzar A on Shabbos can be mevatel their reshus to chatzar B. Okay. Now, osrin ve'ein me'arvin ein mevatlin lasuyemai. What's going to be the case of osrin ve'ein me'arvin ein mevatlin? That when you have a situation where it's going to be usher to carry, ve'ein me'arvin, and you would be unable to make an Eruv before Shabbos, ein mevatlin, and you cannot be mevatel the reshus on Shabbos. Lasuyemai, what's that coming to include? Lav lasuye is not coming to include nachri, that this case of this non-Jew who comes on Shabbos, vida also me'esmol. Now, if he would have come already before Shabbos, then logo me'esmol, then just let him rent it from before Shabbos, and that would be fine. Then they didn't make their own Eruv, they rented it from the non-Jew before Shabbos, no problem. Ela lav da also b'Shabbata. Rather must be talking about where he came on Shabbos, and even though b'katani osrin ve'ein ma'arvin ein mevatlin shma minam, we're saying that this is the case of osrin, that the fact that he came back on Shabbos means that now nobody's allowed to carry anymore. Ve'ein ma'arvin, and you can't make an Eruv with him, right? This is somebody that you would be unable to make an Eruv with, because he's not Jewish. Ein mevatlin, and we're saying that you would be unable to be mevatel reshus. So that is the question on Rabbi Yochanan. How could Rabbi Yochanan say, or how could we be saying that they were able to be mevatel reshus in this case with the non-Jew, wouldn't this case be the case of Osrin ve'en ma'arvin ein mevatlin? Shma mina. Okay, so, okay. I mean, it sounds to me like Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan would disagree about this. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, said Rav Yosef, Lo shmieli hashmaita. Rav Yosef said, I never heard this. So it's very interesting. We had this exact setup actually in Masechta Nida, and the Lamed Tesam Aleph. So Rav Yosef said that is there as well. And Rashi explained over there that Rav Yosef was a student of Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda was a student of Shmuel. And therefore Rav Yosef assumed that if there was anything that Shmuel said, he would have heard it, by way of Rav Yehuda, his teacher. And Rav Yosef, of course, had an encyclopedic memory, as we know, that he was Sinai. And meaning, the interesting thing about Rav Yosef is, on the one hand, he had an encyclopedic memory. On the other hand, he forgot everything. So basically what's happening here is that Rav Yosef is saying, I don't get it. How could it be that Shmuel said that when you have those two chutzers, one inner and one outer, okay, and the people on the inner one forgot to make an Eruv, they could be Mevatel the reshus to the people in the outer chutzer, and then the people in the outer chutzer can carry? How could it be that Shmuel said this? I would know about it if he said it. So Amar Rav Yosef lo shmieli hashmaita. I never heard this thing from Shmuel. And Abaye reminds of Yosef, because Rav Yosef got sick and he forgot everything, forgot much of his learning. So Abaye said to him, At Amart Nialan, no, you actually told this to us. Amart Nialan, and you told it to us on the following. To Amar Shmuel, that says Shmuel, Ein bitul reshus mechatzer lechatzer, ve'en bitul reshus bechurva. That you cannot be mevatel or reshus from one chatzer to another chatzer, and not in a churva, not in like a destroyed property. Ve'amart lan Allah, and Rav Yosef, you told us about it. Ki Amar Shmuel, that when Shmuel says in bitul reshus mechatzer lechatzer, that you cannot be mevatel reshus from one chatzer to another chatzer. Lo amaran ella shtei chatzeres ufesach echad beinein. That's talking about when you have two chatzers and there's a door between them, and each one can, if each one makes their own eruv, they can carry in their own eruv. They just can't carry between themselves, and they cannot be mevatel the reshus in that case, in order to allow somebody from one chatzer to carry to the other one. Aval zoy lifnim mizo, but in a situation where you have one chatzer that's more inner than the other, mitoch she'osrin ze al ze mivatlin, since if the inner chutzner does not make an eruv, well then it would be forbidden for the people in the outer chutzner to carry in the outer chutzner. Well, the people in the inner chutzner would be able to be mevatel their own reshus in order to enable the people in the outer reshus to carry, in the outer chutzner to carry. So Abaye says, look, you certainly did hear of this halacha because you told us this halacha in the name of Shmuel. Amrle ana amina mishmei de Shmuel. And Rav Yosef said, really? How could I possibly have quoted Shmuel as saying that? V'amar Shmuel, didn't Shmuel say, Ein lanu be'Ayruvin ela kilashon mishnasenu? But Shmuel said that when it comes to the kulas, when it comes to Ayruvin, so we can't just, make up our own kulas. We only have that which it says in the Mishnah. What does it say in the Mishnah? Anshe chatzer v'lo anshe chatzeres. The people of the Chatzar and not the people in the Chatzeres. This is talking about, and we've seen this before, that if you have 5 people who live in one Chatzar, and one person forgets to join in the Eruv, so he could be Mevatel reshus to everybody else. So we see Anshe Chatzer v'lo Anshe Chatzeros. That's specifically talking about, when we talk about bitul reshus in a Chatzar, we're talking about an individual Chatzar, not 2 separate Chatzars. So how could it possibly be that if Shmuel says that we're talking about one Chatzar, not 2 Chatzeros, how could it be that he would say that when you have an inner Chatzar and an outer Chatzar, and the people in the inner Chatzar didn't make an Eruv, that they could just be Mevatel the reshus to the outer Chatzar? Amrle, so Abaye says to Rav Yosef, Ki amart lan mishmei de Shmuel, when you told us in the name of Shmuel, Ein lanu be'Ayruvin el kilash mishnasenu. So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, when you told us that teaching that you're quoting me right now, that Shmuel said that when it comes to Ayruvin, it's only that which we have in the Mishnah, i.e., an individual chatzar, but not multiple chatzars. It was in the following context. Aha amartlan, you said it to us upon the following: Sha'amavui lachzeres kechatzer lebatim. That a mavui is to, it's like an SAT analogy, that a mavui is to chatzeres as blank is to houses. So mavui is to chatzeris as a chatzer is to houses. Meaning, and we've seen this before as well, I think we even quoted Rav Nachman as saying it, but that a mavui needs to have, chatzers branching off of it, just like a chatzer needs to have houses, multiple houses going into it. So in that case, you'd have to have multiple chatzers and not just one chatzer. Okay? Gufa, we said earlier. Amar Shmuel, ein bitul reshus mechatzer lechatzer. Shmuel said that you cannot be mevatel reshus from one chatzer to another chatzer. Ve'ein bitul reshus b'churva. And you also can't be mevatel reshus in a churva. What this means is that if you have two houses and in between them there's like a destroyed house. So if the people from the two houses didn't make an eruv in that middle space, so then they can't carry there on Shabbos. And we say that you can one house cannot be mevatel the reshus to the other one. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Yesh bitul reshus mechatzer lechatzer, that you can be mevatel reshus from one chatzer to another one. V'yesh bitul reshus b'chorva, and you can be mevatel reshus in a chorva utzricha, and we need both cases. The ashma'inan mechatzer lechatzer, because if we would only have the example of being of chatzer lechatzer, so I would say b'hakam or Shmuel that it's in this case where Shmuel says that you cannot be mevatel from one chatzer to the other, mishum deha tashmishta lechud va tashmishta lechud, because they're independent entities. Right? Because even without the bittul, they could still carry in their own chatzers. They're not really dependent on each other, and therefore one can't be mevatel to the other. Aval churva de tashmishta chad le tarvayu, but in the churva where if they didn't make an eruv, then nobody can carry at all. So then maybe what? So then ema modi le Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe Shmuel would agree with Rabbi Yochanan that one person can be mevatel, so that the other person can use the chatzer. V'chi idmar b'ha. And if we would only have the case of the churva, b'haka am Rabbi Yochanan, this is where Rabbi Yochanan would say that you can be mevatel reshus, aval b'hach modle l'Shmuel. But by two separate chatzers, maybe we would agree with Shmuel that you cannot be mevatel reshus tzricha. Therefore, we need both cases. So I'm actually going to hold it here, even though there's like a lot left on the page. I'm going to hold it here just because the next part gets pretty complicated, and I just wasn't able to give it proper attention. So rather than rushing through it, I'm just going to hold it over here, and we'll just have to cover a little bit more ground tomorrow. So that was Daf Samach Vav of Masechta Ayruvin, not Daf Samach Zayin like I've written in my notes. And I think that the main kind of big sugya, there was like a few kind of intricate kind of cases, but being mevatel reshus to a nachri, being mevatel reshus to other Jews after having made a rental agreement with a non-Jew who came back on Shabbos. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to say that it's okay, whereas Shmuel seems to say that it would not be okay, and other interesting eruv chatzar things. Well, that was Daf Samach Vav. Peace.